Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries.
This is The Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, it falls again on the coaching staff.
Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
You know, when you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready? Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is another edition of the Cameron Parker Show, and we will kick things off very quickly because I have a very special guest on the phone, one that, well, I'm sure you've heard a bunch of his music played in between some of the breaks that I do over here in the Cameron Parker Show. I am pleased and blessed to be joined by singer, well, songwriter, editor over at Predominantly Orange, and that would be Sayre Bedinger. How you doing, my man?
Doing great, Cam. How you doing?
How's it feel to be a part of the Cameron Parker Show for the first time?
It's a surreal moment for me, I gotta say. It's pretty awesome.
I know. Is there anything you can't do? I mean, you talk Broncos. You're a songwriter. I mean, you're obviously helping out with your daughter Mila. Doing the Mila channel. Is there anything you can't do?
Well, if you can help me find a way to keep my son asleep during the night, that would be number one right now. That's number one on the list of things that I can't do.
And maybe underneath that, trying to figure out what the Broncos are doing and trying to figure out exactly what is going on over there at Dove Valley. So that's probably the tertiary one, right?
Yeah.
Let's just go ahead and kick right into it. What is the current state, in your opinion, for the Broncos, like right now, based on what we've seen last year and then going into this season?
Well, I think right now they're, to be a little harsh about it, I think right now they're kind of a mess. I wouldn't even say they're kind of a mess. I would say they are a mess. And I think that another thing that I think about this team is they're kind of going through sort of a mid-season rebuild in a way. We've kind of seen this a little bit with some of the roster moves that they've been making, and just noticing this over the last few weeks. Quite a few guys are getting promoted off the practice squad, and they're putting guys on injured reserve with, it could be injuries that maybe aren't requiring season-ending surgery, but they're lengthy enough injuries that the team is just deciding, well, we might as well get a look at some of these guys. Like, for example, Gerald Garcia Williams, the linebacker, or Elijah Wilkinson, the tackle, or, guys like that who are kind of getting called up off the practice squad. We could see Austin Traylor get called up off the practice squad as soon as tomorrow. So I think that what they're kind of doing is they're kind of reevaluating. Oh, another guy, Deontay Mountain, the linebacker, who saw Kasim Adebali got waived this week. And so I think the Broncos are kind of stepping back, taking a look at the drawing board and saying, look, these are guys that our scouting department brought in. We're pretty much out of playoff contention. We might as well get these young guys in. And if we start winning games, let's just see what happens. But if not, that's okay. So I think that the Broncos are almost kind of in that in-between, that no man's land, that purgatory where you're kind of a losing team, but you're also kind of maybe thinking about still contending. I mean, if they win a game this weekend, their record is 4-6. opportunity, as small as it might seem, to win some games and potentially get into the conversation in the AFC playoff race. But honestly, at this point, I got it, and I think that that's kind of the state of the team right now, is they're doubtful of a shot at the playoffs, and that's kind of the morale of the team.
You know, obviously there's been a lot of heat thrown at the coaching staff, and probably rightfully so. You know, and one of the issues that I have with the coaching staff, at least to begin with, they said all the right things, obviously going into the season as far as the retooling versus the rebuild. But yet, you know, we're hearing rumblings that they knew it was going to be a rebuild year. So my potential problem is with the coaching staff is if they knew for a fact that it was going to be a rebuild, why not just come out and say it was a rebuild year right off the bat versus using the words like retool? Because if you say those words like it's a retool, well, that means that, one, your Super Bowl window was not closed, and it means, two, you're going to be using still a lot of players that have a Super Bowl certainly on their fingers, and so they need those types of players to come up big, and obviously they haven't, and so they now started to kind of backtrack in a way and start to say that we are, in essence, a rebuild. So, and so that's why I think that you're seeing them turn to the likes of maybe a Paxton Lynch here to play at some point in the Cincinnati game. But I think my biggest frustration is how this coaching staff has handled potentially this team overall.
Yeah, I think you raised a lot of good points there. That the coaching staff, you know, they probably didn't expect to come into this year and have to really rebuild the team from the ground up. Because honestly, when you look at the roster, they don't and they shouldn't. But the really big thing here is that the coaching staff was given an offense to work with in terms of player personnel. And John Elway and the front office put that together. So now you're looking at a situation here where, and look across the league at similar situations. Look at the Los Angeles Rams with the new head coach, and the Buffalo Bills with the new head coach, and a number of other teams that have young quarterbacks or that have relatively or largely unproven quarterbacks and a lot of question marks on the roster. This coaching staff was in the same boat as, say, Sean McVay. Let's go with that example. Sean McVay out in Los Angeles. Well, Sean McVay has Jared Goff, and even though Jared Goff was really bad as a rookie, he was a number one draft pick, and you expect a number one draft pick to ultimately and eventually show why he was a number one draft pick, and coaching is a big deal in that regard. So the Broncos brought in Mike McCoy and Bill Musgrave. Obviously, I mean, those guys are two of the best in the league. I mean, look what they did. Look what they've done the last 7-8 years in this league, even just to cut their resume short. Those guys are two great offensive coaches. And Vance Joseph, really, I mean, even being a former quarterback, he could really just take that situation and say, all right, I'm going to take my hands off. I'm going to let those guys make the ultimate decision, and we'll roll with who they think is best. Well, it didn't really work the same way out in Los Angeles, where it was kind of, we're going with Jared Goff, and that's just the way it is. Or Philadelphia, I mean, they're going with Carson Wentz no matter what. And Dallas is going with Dak Prescott. Those are all guys drafted the same year of Paxton Lynch. So it's unfortunate for this Broncos coaching staff that Lynch hasn't developed to the level of those same guys that are his peers in the 2016 draft. But I think that they were given a very, very similar situation, if not a better situation, in terms of the personnel defensively and the assets that John Elway went out and acquired, specifically Ron Leary on the offensive line, Garrett Bowles, left tackle. We saw this past game how big of a difference just having a quarterback that can process things quickly makes. No sacks, one hit, and that was it against the Patriots. And so I think that this coaching staff, where they have really let everyone down, is an inability to help Paxton Lynch succeed in any sort of way.
Yeah, and you know, and maybe this is just, and I think maybe this is a point that really doesn't really get talked about a whole lot. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but you look at Vance Joseph's resume overall. He was a former quarterback. He played over at the University of Colorado. Obviously, overall, when you look at Vance Joseph, he's a former quarterback. He should at least understand the position. So really, when you look at it overall, he should at least understand it. But as far as the resume is concerned, he spent so much time on the defensive side of the ball. Did he spend so much time on the defensive side of the ball that he forgot exactly how, and it may sound harsh, forgot exactly how a quarterback operates now in the National Football League? So, and maybe that in turn could go as far as to say that as far as handling the quarterbacks so far with Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler and Paxton Lynch. But then again, the Paxton Lynch dynamic certainly was going last year as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's a great point, and maybe even from that angle, maybe Vance Joseph sees, as a defensive coordinator, as a defensive coach, maybe he sees or thinks he's seen how easy it is to stop the quote-unquote gimmick-style offense or college-style offense, and how easy it is to sort of neutralize that in today's NFL if you can't execute as a passer. And that certainly has some validity. I mean, we've seen it with Tim Tebow. We saw how Colin Kaepernick slowed down after his big years in 2012 and 2013. We saw it from Robert Griffin III. We've seen it from a number of guys that run these more college-oriented offenses without being able to really accurately pass the ball downfield. And I think what's been a big development for this in the NFL has been what's going on out in Kansas City and what's going on in Philadelphia. Those are two teams that have a lot of the same offensive concepts, a lot of different things that they do as far as creating opportunities for their players to succeed at exactly what it is that they do well. So for Carson Wentz, for example, I think about this play every time I think about this argument. Carson Wentz against the Denver Broncos 2 weeks ago, a run-pass option play where Aqib Talib bit hard on the run. He bit really hard, and he thought that Carson Wentz was going to roll out and take the ball and run for a first down, but Wentz noticed that Talib broke off the spot, and he just kind of sidearmed the ball off balance downfield to Alshon Jeffrey for an easy touchdown. Those are things that you see at the college level. And Aqib Talib, arguably the best corner in the league, is getting burned by it. And so you have to go back to the drawing board, and I really hope that the Broncos are and will do that, because that kind of thing is having success in today's NFL, and I think it's sustainable if your quarterback can grow as a passer quickly.
How much blame should John Elway get? Because you and I have been spoken at length as far as Twitter, and you can follow Sayre Bedinger at Sayre Bedinger. We've obviously been talking a bunch at length as far as, is John Elway to blame, and is he 100% to blame at this point, and especially with the draft and everything, and as far as his draft ability to draft the offensive side of the ball, should that carry more weight and not and necessarily ignoring what he did as far as in the draft, as far as drafting Justin Simmons and Will Parks, and now Adam Gotsis, a second-round draft pick. Who knows about DeMarcus Walker, but that, in essence, could end up leading to the coaching staff as far as the inability to find the right position for him. But should there be some ample blame for John Elway's inability to draft offensive talent?
Well, absolutely. I think that criticism is very fair, and I think that if you look across the league, I think you could make similar claims about just about every general manager out there. I mean, there's not many general managers right now in the NFL that are drafting so exceptionally well on both sides of the football that they can't afford, or that they can afford to not supplement in free agency, if that makes sense. John Elway has really really taken a different approach as a general manager. I mean, I don't know what the exact statistic is, but I remember reading one time from Patrick Smythe, the Broncos PR expert and long time. He's been great to everyone who covers the team. He's just a great guy. He tweeted something out about the fact that John Elway is the only general manager in the league that has brought in a Pro Bowl player, a player that was actually selected to the Pro Bowl through the draft, through free agency, through undrafted free agency, and off of a practice squad pickup or something. I think that was or off of a waiver claim or something like that, which would be pretty much unprecedented in today's NFL. I mean, John Elway has found ways to build a roster without being excellent at the draft. And I was thinking about this when I was kind of arguing about it on Twitter with some people, not necessarily arguing, but really debating, is John Elway to blame for this? And look at what he inherited back in 2011. He inherited Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker at wide receiver, and so he didn't have to come in and draft a big time receiver. He hasn't had to. I mean, he drafted Cody Latimer in 2014, but did he really need to? I mean, he had just signed Emmanuel Sanders, so they drafted Cody Latimer as a way to say, look, our offense is stacked, and we're going to bring in this Cody Latimer guy, and we're going to see if his athleticism and ability translates. And it hasn't to this point. But I mean, you look back at the players that he inherited, and Josh McDaniels wasn't the greatest head coach for the Broncos, but man, that guy had a little bit of an eye for talent at least. I mean, look at Sean Moreno, who is I believe he's still the most recent 1,000-yard back in Denver, if memory serves correctly, the 2013 season when he rushed for over 1,000 yards. That was a player inherited by John Elway. So he was the starting back when Elway got there in 2011, or at least Willis McGahee was still there as well. And so you have McGahee and Moreno, and you have Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, and you use your top pick in the draft on Von Miller, and you kind of just wait on the quarterback situation because Tim Tebow was a first-round pick the year prior, and so what John Elway inherited kind of set the tone for what he did as far as drafting 4-5 years ago. So he inherited some decent players, and then he brought in Peyton Manning, which he knew was only going to be a 4, maybe 5-year investment. But at the same time, the same year that he brought in Manning, he drafted Brock Osweiler, who he thought was going to be the next franchise quarterback. I mean, Osweiler was 21 when the Broncos picked him in the draft, and so I think that Elway deserves plenty of blame for the guys that he has brought in and how they've developed. I don't think that he's hit on the draft picks, but you definitely can't blame him for going out and picking the right spots, the right positions in the right spot. I mean, he's now used a first and second round draft pick on a quarterback. He's used a second and third and fourth round pick on running backs. He's used the second and third and I think a fourth round pick on wide receivers, and so he's bringing in guys at positions where you would think, okay, we're using premium picks on these positions on offense, but they're just not hitting. Also, he's used at least a third, as high as a third for sure on tight end. So, I mean, he does deserve blame. He does deserve criticism for the players that he's picked. But I think in terms of just his overall drafting strategy, it's been there. It's been right. But they just have to do better of finding fits with the coaches that they have and the things that they want to do offensively because they're just not finding the right fit in the draft.
Two more questions before we let you go. Continuing with the John Elway theme, obviously but there's the potential that he. It's been so long ago. I can't remember if he did sign the contract extension. He did?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been so long ago. It feels like he's.
I know. It really does.
Despite all that contract extension, and this is potentially, well, obviously it is. This is his worst season as a general manager and of football operations. could this potentially at some point come back to bite John Elway, potentially for a Denver Broncos job and actually keeping a job here?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, I think everybody deserves the opportunity to fail because it really allows you to go back to the drawing board and see what works and what doesn't work. The Broncos have found, under John Elway's reign, they found exactly what does work on both sides of the ball. And I point to this anytime I have a discussion about John Elway and his abilities as a decision maker in the front office. These are the two things that I point to. Number one, he organized and put together the best offense in NFL history. I mean, you could certainly argue that. You could certainly argue it, but statistically, in terms of points scored and records set in one season, there's no better offense in the history of the NFL than the 2013 Denver Broncos. I would also argue that John Elway constructed the best defense in football history. Now, a lot of fans, the 2000 Ravens, the 1985 Bears, 2002 Buccaneers, there's a lot of, and the 2013 Seattle Seahawks, of course, there's a lot of fan bases that would disagree and say, no, our defense is the best of all time. No, our defense is the best of all time. I think when you look at the players that Denver defense took down in the 2015 Super Bowl 50 season, and you look at that playoff run, Ben Roethlisberger, Super Bowl champion, Tom Brady, 5-time Super Bowl champion, and then you go into the Super Bowl and you take on the MVP and number one pick, Cam Newton. You're heavy underdogs in all those games. Even playing at home in the first two playoff games, that defense held its ground, and they put on one of the best performances over the course of a regular season in terms of winning games. I don't know if people, just general NFL fans, I don't know if general NFL fans truly appreciate what that defense did in 2015 as far as picking up the slack for the offense. And I know you can speak to that because it was bad. The game against Kansas City where Peyton Manning finally became injured enough, in quotation marks, where he became injured enough to be pulled from the game. That was one of the worst offensive performances we've ever seen as Broncos fans, to be blunt. And that same team went on to win the Super Bowl that same year. It was remarkable. It was incredible what they were able to do. The offense stepped up when it needed to, when it absolutely had to. But I would say, to circle back to my original point and talking about John Elway as a GM, he's constructed the best offense and the best defense ever. And that has a lot to do with other guys in the scouting department and front office as well. But, I mean, just amazing what he's been able to do in such a short amount of time. And so I would say there's a time to trust, and then a time to kind of start calling for somebody's job. And if John Elway had no success in the postseason to this point, if the Broncos still hadn't won a championship, or if they hadn't even been to a Super Bowl in his reign, I would say, all right, you know what? This guy he's just not doing the right thing. But this is really going to be only the second year where the Broncos aren't truly contenders, Super Bowl contenders, or I guess you could call it the third year, because that first year wasn't really. They won the AFC West, but they would have been a long shot. So I think this is really only the third season in Elway's reign where the Broncos haven't been legitimate Super Bowl contenders. And you know what, that is understandable, because what position is unsettled at this point? And what's the common theme between all three of those teams that weren't legitimate Super Bowl contenders? The quarterback position. And so Elway's got to get that figured out, and he can't always rely on signing a guy like Peyton Manning. He's not always going to become available. It's just not going to happen. So I think Elway's got to figure out the QB spot, and if and when he does, I think that everybody's going to be back in the la-la land. John Elway's the greatest general manager in the league, this, that, and the other, and he's both proof.
Right. It's gonna kind of go back, doing kind of a 180 and starting to kind of really appreciate exactly what Elway did again. Because, I mean, you look back on it, as far as positional groups, as far as maybe his weakest positional group as far as drafting, I would say, is probably the offensive line. And, I mean, really, Garrett Bowles potentially could end up being his best offensive line draft pick. I mean, we don't know about Connor McGovern. We know that he can, lift like you can't believe. I mean, the guy is literally as strong as Hulk. I mean, the guy he squatted about 500, I think, during the whole draft process. But, wow, by the way, I just got breaking news that Scott Frost in Nebraska is about to agree to a deal.
All right.
That's the guy.
That's great. That's huge.
It is huge.
Hey, now that could be the ticket right there for Nebraska, getting a guy like Josh Allen, because Scott Frost really has run a high octane passing attack pretty much wherever he's gone. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, really.
That could be a nice fit for Josh Allen.
Well, it's so funny, and we can talk. I'll finish off the point just because of this breaking news here. You and I were talking about it. We are Big Ten aficionados. It's surprising to me that really there hasn't been a whole lot of transfers. You and I were talking about it briefly. As far as just how surprising that there really hasn't been a whole lot of grad transfers or just transfers in general to the Big Ten. I mean, really, the only one that's been so significant during that time period was Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson went to Wisconsin. And that's why I was just kind of speculating as far as teams and everybody for Josh Allen, that Wisconsin might be a team that if I were smart enough, if I were a team that would want to go after a quarterback, because, I mean, the last few quarterbacks that have, well, at least since Russell Wilson was drafted and left, their quarterback play has been, well, putting it bluntly, downright miserable. But because of the offensive line and because of their ability to run the football, they've been pretty dominant, and especially with the defensive side of the ball. So,
yeah, it is surprising because you look at it, and most of those Big Ten teams run, at least the good ones, the really good ones, run pro-style offense. Look at Jim Harbaugh's Michigan Wolverines. Look at Wisconsin. Look at Iowa. Look at Nebraska. Look at all these teams that are really good. Even Urban Meyer's offense, to a degree at times, can be, well, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch. But I think that it's interesting that a lot of these Big Ten players who don't get on the field early, they'll transfer to smaller, maybe schools out west, or maybe they'll transfer to directional Michigan schools or things like that. But yeah, you don't see a lot of Russell Wilson caliber players making a transfer into the Big Ten, which I think, for their professional aspirations, I think that would be a big help. But I guess you just never know.
yeah, you really just never know because, I mean, it is kind of, and maybe that's a huge knock as far as quarterback play for the Big Ten because, I mean, really, there hasn't been a significant quarterback that has come into the National Football League and just lit it up. I mean, really, you think of all the Big Ten quarterbacks. I mean, the best Big Ten quarterback potentially to come into the National Football League is in the last 10, 15 years has been Drew Brees. I mean, with Purdue.
Brees is out there.
I mean,
you got Russell Wilson. You got Trevor. I mean, Russell Wilson wasn't homegrown in the Big Ten, so
right.
Maybe he doesn't count. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Trevor Siemian came out of Northwestern. C.J. Beathard's obviously still very unproven. Let's see, who else do we got out of the Big
Kyle
Ten?
Orton.
Kyle Orton. Yeah, it's a thin list, I would say. I mean, obviously Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, the Michigan Wolverines. But even at Michigan, I mean, Tom Brady was, not that special in terms of a prospect. I mean, he was a 6th-round draft pick for a reason, but at the same time, that was obviously a huge miss by the entire NFL. But, I mean, it is interesting. The Big Ten is not exactly a factory for quarterbacks.
No. So that kind of takes, we were talking about Josh Allen, it kind of takes me to the point as far as drafting quarterbacks. And we've established that the Denver Broncos have maybe their potentially biggest need. And if there's one thing that is certainly hold true for the Denver Broncos in this span, it's the fact that they've really needed to upgrade the quarterback position. And in essence, the quarterback, kind of like this, in essence, is like a ace starting pitcher for a pitching staff. You know, you need that type of guy that can be a dog, that's going to go on that mound and can win you Game 7 or win you a game, that first game of a playoff. But it's that kind of guy that can go to the mound every single day and win you a game. And so the Broncos are still trying to find that guy. And right now, it appears that they could potentially give the reins to Paxton Lynch. We talked about it at length as far as Paxton Lynch. I wrote an article about it, talking about how he's inching closer to his return. I potentially just see a scenario where, and I think Trevor Seaman's a great guy. I think he certainly played probably better than certainly maybe some might give him credit for last year, but it still wasn't good enough to take the offense to where it needed to be as far as talent-wise. So they clearly are a quarterback away, in my opinion, from really kind of getting back to where they are. So where do they go? I mean, I kind of put a Twitter post out there kind of outlining some of the quarterbacks that could potentially be out there in the free agent market. Because it certainly has the makings to be one of the best, if not the best, that it's been in quite some time. You know, with Alex Smith, Drew Brees, Kirk Cousins, Eli Manning, and potentially maybe even Sam Bradford, or potentially his other backup, Teddy Bridgewater. You just never know. And then you got the draft, which certainly the Broncos are teetering on the process of maybe being a top 5 draft pick. So where do you go if you are interested in a quarterback for the Broncos?
Oh, that's a great question at this point, because I think like you said, there's so many options that are potentially on the table that I think it's going to be really hard, at least for us fans, to narrow it down right away until some dominoes start falling. So here's where I would think that things are at, just in my mind right now. I think that in terms of a veteran player, I would definitely cross Alex Smith off the list, and not for the Broncos' potential lack of interest, but for the reasons that we've talked about in our chat group, and it's that Alex Smith is under contract with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I can't think of a harder thing to pull off than a trade within your own division for a quarterback that's capable of putting you over the top.
It's kind of like it's kind of like the whole rumors with Phillip Rivers and
right.
There's
no way unless the Broncos made a franchise-crippling move in terms of delivering draft capital for a player like Alex Smith. Say the price tag on that was 2 first-round picks and at least another second and a third-round pick. That's a lot to have to give up to a division rival, especially considering, like you said, the Broncos are in line potentially picking the top 5. So I would say, for me, Alex Smith is off the table. Drew Brees, his contract expires with the Saints this year, and he's playing well. That in and of itself sounds really good on paper, especially when you consider the Broncos' success with an old quarterback in Peyton Manning or John Elway or whomever. But Drew Brees is going to be 39 years old next year. Now, we've seen Tom Brady play well into obviously the age of 40 here, and so I'm not saying that Drew Brees is done by any means. And obviously, like we talked about in the chat group with Steven, it would be really hard for the Saints to bring Brees back. But I think for the Broncos, that would be, as much as I would love to see that signing happen, because I'm a huge fan of Drew Brees as a human being and what he's done with the league and what he did for the city of New Orleans in such a difficult time during Hurricane Katrina, which seems like yesterday but was forever ago.
Right.
His he's the true consummate professional, and he would set the example. He'd be that missing leader that the Broncos need, but for how long? That's the question.
Right.
Does that move cripple your franchise for the future if you say, all right, we'll take 1 year of Drew Brees and we're gonna roll the dice on a Super Bowl season here, and then all of a sudden you're maybe 3-3 or 4-6, like we could potentially be here. I mean, what if that happens? And then you have Drew Brees, and you didn't spend a high enough draft pick on a quarterback, and you've already kind of told Paxton Lynch by signing Drew Brees that you don't believe in him. It's a domino effect that could be very, very costly.
Well,
So for me, I would steer clear of Brees. Kirk Cousins is, he's going to be the highest paid player in the NFL, in NFL history, not just in the NFL today, but at least for one season or however long it takes for the Packers to get Aaron Rodgers a new deal, Kirk Cousins will be the highest paid player in NFL history as of March, whenever the new league year starts, potentially even before that. And are the Broncos the team that's going to do that? Are the Broncos going to make Kirk Cousins the richest man in NFL history? That, again, as much on paper as it sounds great to say, all right, yeah, let's bring in Kirk Cousins and then we'll draft the best offensive skill player or offensive lineman. As great as that sounds to me, the part of it that doesn't sound so great is, having a quarterback on the payroll who's averaging $28 million a season. That's again, crippling potentially to your franchise. And there's certain ways that you can get around, that at least the initial cap hit being too large. But I think that the Broncos, with already a $20 million player in Von Miller, who's not going anywhere, you've got a situation there where it would be really difficult to sign Kirk Cousins and just build a viable team around him over the course of the next 5 years. The big upside with Kirk Cousins is this: he's 29, going on 30, and he would be your franchise quarterback for, like John always says, from now on. So that's a great option, I would say. But can they afford that is the question.
right. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, with Drew Brees, obviously there's the history of the success that they had with Peyton Manning. And so it's easy to go to Drew Brees and say that, Manning had that type of success, and obviously the John Elway dynamic, and Drew Brees could potentially be lured here. But there's just a lot of factors, with that, because of the fact that, I think and you kind of talked me into it in that chat room, but it's the fact that it could end up being New Orleans or retirement. Because, look at the team right now. The team has been very successful during the season, and that weighs heavily on a quarterback's mind, or just a quarterback that is in a contract year that's looking to get paid, that's looking to potentially be on a team, and especially as part of the team that you spent so much of your career with, and winning a Super Bowl and actually beating Peyton Manning to win a Super Bowl. So it weighs heavily on your mind to the point that I really should consider retiring with that team that I spent so much of my career with. And especially with the way that they are playing this current year, and especially with the defense that maybe you could argue is potentially the best defense that Drew Brees has ever had around him.
I would say you're absolutely right about that. I think that is the case, and the Saints have done a tremendous job of turning around quickly, and I think that the Broncos should really learn from that. And I don't know what it was. The Saints hadn't been hitting on a lot of draft picks. They had traded a former recent first-round pick, Stephon Anthony. They hadn't really been hitting a lot in the draft. And then this year, my gosh, they went out and they got Marshawn Lattimore and Ryan Ramczyk in the first round. Those guys have played at a very high level as rookies. And then you look at Alvin Kamara, the running back, and what he's done, and he's been tremendous. Just a perfect fit
really
and so
have.
they're going to be in a similar situation to us, really, in a year or so. When Drew Brees decides to retire, they're going to be that quarterback away because they haven't drafted anybody to really be that heir apparent to Brees either. So
Right.
that'll be interesting to watch.
Right, because I mean that's really kind of because they originally had drafted Garrett Grayson, formerly of over here, Fort Collins, over in Colorado State. They originally drafted him to be kind of that heir apparent. Well, he's not been that guy, and he's kind of floated around with numerous teams, and now obviously he's on the Falcons practice squad again. So I think that now you go into you transition back to the Broncos and with the Kirk Cousins dynamic, and while that's probably the best case scenario as far as the Broncos and as far as a guy that's not only just going to set up your team going forward in the now, but it's going to set your team up for the future just overall on paper. But on that piece of paper is an expensive pen and money that's going to be going into Kirk Cousins like that. And so, and ideally with John Elway, he really doesn't spend all that money unless it's the last minute. I mean, look at Brock Osweiler. I mean, Brock Osweiler signed the newest Matt Flynn contract, 4 years, $72 million. But he offered him 4 years, $64. So really, you look at John Elway. He's never going to be in a situation where he wants to outbid a lot of teams. And so in essence, that's going to take it to my last question, which is maybe a two-part question of the last question. And that is potentially that I think John Elway has always shown to always go to the cheapest and at that point the most logical. And this is why I think the Broncos have done so much homework on the the new NFL draft quarterbacks. Because of because of the fact that they know that they have to get it right no matter what with Paxton Lynch or whoever it is going to be. And so now you look at the scenario of now being into the top 5. Here's a scenario which really doesn't get all that talked about because the Broncos are now doing so much homework on the NFL draft quarterbacks. They could now reap a lot of rewards of now potentially being in the top 5 and potentially landing either Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen or Baker Mayfield or potentially a Lamar Jackson. So they're reaping the rewards right now potentially of being in the top 5 and getting a cheap quarterback.
That's it, yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's, to me, that's the best scenario. That's the best outcome of this is that the Broncos, again, like we've been saying, I mean, you don't want to assume even that Paxton Lynch is a bust because, he hasn't played enough games, in my opinion, yet to be declared a bust. I think you could say, I think he's going to be a bust. I think that would be a fair criticism of him at this point, but the Broncos have to find out for sure. I mean, this is the team that scouted him. This is the team that drafted him. This is the team that believes in him. So they have to find that out. And instead, they're doing their homework on that 2018 draft class because you've got to know this is a guy that we can build around if not Paxton Lynch. And so, you mentioned the guys off the top of your right there. It's Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Lamar Jackson, personal favorite of mine, Baker Mayfield. You got guys like that who have proven this year, in my opinion, that they have NFL caliber, NFL talent in more ways than just one. And obviously, all those guys are very different, and all of them have a fatal flaw. And I think that's the interesting part is when you take that gamble on a player, what's the most calculated gamble? Is it going to be with Lamar Jackson? Is he going to be able to hold up to the pounding that his body could take in the NFL because of the style that he plays? We've seen him improve drastically from the pocket this year, but Lamar Jackson, based on the design of Louisville's offense, he takes a lot of big hits. And that's scary for a guy that's under 220 pounds, which he's listed at, I think, 212 or 213. And so you have the fear there of a Robert Griffin III situation, not in the fact that Robert Griffin III was, he sort of became inept at running an NFL offense, because I think Lamar Jackson, he deserves he deserves the opportunity to prove that he can pick up an NFL caliber offense and run it to perfection. But in terms of being hit and taking hits and getting injured, that worries me. And with Josh Rosen, it's his attitude, and you just worry about that because is he going to be defiant to his head coach? Is he going to be the type of guy that you can rely on off the field? Or does he, there's a question which I don't necessarily know if this is any merit whatsoever, but does Josh Rosen care about other things more than football? That's a big, big deal, and that's where some of the Jay Cutler comparisons for him have come into play. For Sam Darnold, we know that Sam Darnold loves football. Sam Darnold is one of the smartest quarterbacks in the country. He emerged at such a young age, showed maturity and poise at such a young age, but he also has shown to be a bit of a gunslinger. He's kind of got, early this season, he kind of had that Jameis Winston trait where, Jameis Winston, there's no play that's ever dead for that guy. He's always to try and make a throw downfield or keep the play alive or keep his team in position to score points or win the game. And on the one hand, you love that about Jameis Winston and Sam Darnold. You love that they're so competitive. On the other hand, they've got to learn how to not turn the ball over. And I think what we've seen from Darnold over the course of the last 6 games of the season is that he's really improving in that regard. He started off with 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and a few fumbles. In the last 6 games, he's got 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he's just taking care of the ball much better. So I think that if it was up in the Mayfield, Baker Mayfield is a guy he's got all the arm talent in the world, but he's a bit smaller in terms of his height, but he's got a great overall build. He's kind of built like a thick running back, and he's not coming from necessarily a pro-style offense either. So what is he going to have to do to make the successful transition quickly to the NFL? For me, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold are going to have very, very quick transitions because they're smart, competitive guys. They've got all the talent that you could ask for in terms of their arm, their athleticism, the ability to spread the ball to all areas of the field. They've both got those things in spades. I think their fatal flaws aren't necessarily as glaring as those of guys like Josh Rosen and Lamar Jackson, and even extending into Mason Rudolph and other guys in this year's draft class. And so, for me, if you have the option between either Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold, I think that those 2 options would be great for the Broncos. But honestly, any one of Darnold, Rosen, Jackson, Mayfield, all those guys really excite me as prospects, and I think that the Broncos would do well to be able to get one of them into camp.
Well, and especially with the identity that could potentially be there with Bill Musgrave. Obviously we haven't seen the growth with Paxton Lynch potentially on the field, but we know exactly what he did with Derek Carr and being a struggling rookie quarterback to last season being a potential MVP candidate. So Bill Musgrave is a very vital piece to helping a young quarterback grow. So who knows potentially of what Paxton Lynch could end up being developed, and because there's no denying he has that talent. It's just it's been a very, very rough go to begin things for him, and so who knows. I would imagine that they probably would go maybe to the Paxton veteran guy, but even then, if they ended up signing a veteran quarterback in the offseason, I don't think that's going to limit them as far as drafting a guy like a Luke Falk, or maybe at the late end of the rounds, or getting a guy like a Mason Rudolph in the mid rounds, or getting a guy that's in those mid rounds because of the fact that they have that veteran quarterback there. But however, do the Broncos want to do that again? That's really the ultimate question. And so, overall, I think as of right now, the cheapest option is to go and do a lot of homework as you can on the draft quarterbacks, continue it, and then see who your best fit is. I certainly did. I was watching tape on Rosen and Darnold and Mayfield. I was really impressed. You outlined a lot of the prospects, at least off the bat, and I really appreciated Sam Darnold because I think that he can be a gunslinger at times, but the one play for me that just sticks into my head that he could be so incredibly accurate was the play against Penn State in the bowl game, and the fact that he threw a pass, I believe it was in the middle of the field, but it had enough touch on it in the end zone to get it over the defender's head, and it was basically placed in a bucket to where it was just, it just was an incredible throw, and the amount of touch that he had on the throw, his delivery, you can probably, put that as a wash because it's not exactly Brock Osweiler's delivery, or those slingshot deliveries, but it's a different delivery, but it's not one that if you want to nitpick on certain traits, and you want to focus on that one, then that's kind of lazy analysis, really. And so a guy like a Sam Darnold, I think is definitely probably one of all the guys certainly that I've saw. I think Darnold is probably the more accurate. Jackson obviously is the most athletic, although I wouldn't count out Mayfield because of his ability to maneuver around the pocket like a Russell Wilson, and the fact that he's probably confident. I think as far as probably all of the quarterbacks there, Mayfield is probably the most confident and the most maybe the most confident that he knows that potentially his game could translate to the next level because of what he's seen with Russell Wilson.
I would agree with all of that. I completely agree.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, hey, I'm going to let you go. I know that we said I was going to talk for about 10 to 20 minutes, but it's the Denver Broncos. They're having a 3-6 season. There's a lot to get off the chest, and I appreciate you taking your time, and I'll have you on here soon, and we can maybe talk a little bit about some baseball. I know you're a big baseball fan. I'm a big baseball fan. Love to maybe not talk football necessarily, but also talk some baseball as well.
I love it, man. It's been a pleasure for me and an honor for me to be on the show, so thanks, Cameron. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And before you go, I want to get maybe some history and some background. We obviously, I've been playing some of the songs from your album, Celebrate Worship, from the church that you were part of, Celebrate Community Church down in Sioux Falls. Give the guys a little bit of a kind of a lesson or a history lesson as far as how did the CD come about? How did you come up with the songs and just kind of a history background as far as the Awaken Love album?
Yeah, so that was really a process that started in 2014 when we just kind of, we really latched on to the idea that we had enough talent and the people to be able to get together and use our time to really write music and write songs for the church, and that's always been a passion of mine is being able to eventually do that. The first time I ever really wrote a song or tried to write a song, I remember I was just laying in my bed and I just had this thought, this line and this melody come to my mind, and I sprinted downstairs to my piano and just kind of tried to flesh it out as best I could and then build around that. And so every song is a different process. The Awaken Love album, interestingly enough, kind of just started off with 2 or 3 songs really that we had put together. It was the song Sing It Out was really the first one that kind of jump started the project, and then we did Famed, and then we did Rescue. And when we had those 3 songs, we kind of knew, okay, I think we can kind of put something together. And so a great friend of mine from Sioux Falls who's now out at Wake Forest in North Carolina, his name is Brian, and he's just an awesome, talented musician, producer, songwriter, all of the above. And so we just kind of asked him, like, hey, would you want to help us produce this album that we're kind of thinking about and co-write with us and do some things like that? And he was obviously 100% on board for that. And so we just kind of worked out the details, and we'd go over to Brian's house a couple times a week and just kind of flesh out these songs that we had in our mind. And some songs come together really quickly. Some songs are really a labor of love and hate too, I guess, because when you're writing stuff, I mean, there's no harsher critic on the music that we have out there than me. And I still sometimes, when I listen to it, I still sometimes am like, oh man, we should have done this, or we should have reworded this, or things like that. And so even as we play these songs live now in the church and everything, I think to myself, like, I really wish I had made this word change on the recording, but that, you know, it is what it is, and it's all good at this point. But that's kind of just part of our growth as writers. And you know that, being a sports writer, I mean, our voice develops over time, and what we wrote 3-4 years ago isn't the same thing that we would write today, because we've grown so much in our voice and our ability to kind of perceive things differently, and to really articulate things better. And so I think that as I've grown as a songwriter, I kind of look back on the Awaken Love album, and I think, man, that was an awesome experience, but also what an opportunity to grow. I think it was a great foundation for me, and just the way that it all came together was so much fun. I got if you listen to the whole album, the majority of the electric guitar was performed by my younger brother Bryce. And, we did everything with in-house musicians at the church. And so vocally, it was done by people in the church. The drums were done by, at the time, he was an 8th grader, if you can believe that. And just an incredible musician. But it was an awesome project for us to do, and I'm just thankful. It took us about a year to get to completion with it, and I'm just so thankful for the journey that we were able to go on with that. And actually, I still remember the first day that we went into the studio was when it was the day that Taylor Swift's 1989 album came out. And so that's how long of a project it was from that day, I think, in November until January of 2016, and then we released it, obviously, in August of 2016. And so it was a really long process, way longer than most albums take to get done, but I think just the nature of how we were doing things at the time, and our knowledge of how to put it all together, that was really the best that we could do. And so I'm very proud of it. I love that I was able to do it, and I'm excited to continue working on projects here going forward.
Absolutely. And you know, the one thing that and I love having a voice. You know, God gave us a voice for a reason. He gave us a voice. It's a platform, you know, for us to continue to spread God's love. And you know, and I firmly believe that, you know, God gave you the words to put in your music. And you know, it's the same thing with really my podcasts and the shows. You know, he's giving me those words, the best words that can say. You know, he says, let your words be few. You know, and so in essence, for me, as far as a podcast goes, you got to keep them short and sweet, but at the same time succinct and the best words possible. And especially for you, and you want to make sure that they are the best words possible so that you can have them reach, you know, a certain group of people that are struggling, or and especially with this being a worship album, just how important worship really is. You know, especially Dance for You. So I think that you know, it's been an incredible experience for me to get the chance to listen to the album and obviously kind of help share it a little bit, obviously in my show as well. So I do want to thank you for having me have the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely, I'm honored that you would use it, and it's really great. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, hey man, I'm gonna let you go and go help out those kiddos.
All right, thanks, Cam.
Absolutely, we'll have you on again, man.
Sounds great.
All right, thanks. And that was Sayre Bedinger. Obviously, a much lengthy discussion. The plan was going to have him on for at least 10 to 20 minutes, but we did talk at length. You know, there's a lot, like I mentioned, there's a lot to get off your chest. There's a lot to talk about. You know, obviously the Broncos aren't having necessarily the best season overall, but we really really outlined a whole bunch of things as far as the draft, the potential free agent market as far as a quarterback is concerned. Obviously, it all does hinge on the quarterback position, and that's really what you want overall. Is you want the potential for your team to get better, and if you can improve necessarily in one area, that can help you benefit going forward as a team. Because the one thing I certainly believe, and I don't, and the thing is that I think this team is still a good football team overall, and if you can get this team to necessarily where it was maybe as an offense that would at the same time do enough to get you over the hump to win a Super Bowl, but have an offense that can do maybe just a little bit more. It's going to take enough pressure off of a defense that is clearly gassed this year, that deserves a decent amount of blame, and it's a defense that maybe potentially is starting to fall off, but it appears gradual. But the fact that, and the reason why I still believe that this defense is a worrisome, absolutely, that they've felt that they've fallen off so much from where they were to begin the season and then to where they are now. But the fact is, everything is correctable. They aren't playing the necessary defense that they would with Wade Phillips here, and they're playing a little bit more zone to take off the fact that they don't want to be as gassed as often. But the fact is, they're giving up big plays in the middle and giving up some yards on the defensive line. So the fact is that the defense is starting to a little bit regress. However, I would say it's a little bit more off of concepts and the ability to play a zone defense versus a man-to-man defense, that press man-to-man defense, that one-on-one defense that is just so vital for that Denver Broncos defense, and they have been struggling with that mightily. So it is incredibly frustrating, and obviously the Denver Broncos must look to play better at that. But I think overall the team, it's not the biggest weakness in the team. I mean, overall the team certainly is playing better. It's playing worse offensively than it is defensively, despite the fact that the defense does deserve some blame. I want to thank Sayre Bedinger for tuning in, for jumping on to the Cannon Parker Show. I just am so blessed to have that man in my life, and I hope that we can have him on at some point, and we can talk about it some more, potentially of him on the show. He's a big baseball fan. We don't have to talk about football as often. We can talk about baseball or basketball. He's a multi-versatile sports guru, and so in essence having that, it helps feed off of each other, and I'm just incredibly fortunate to have him in my life. So thank you very much to Sayre Bedinger. Follow him on Twitter at Sayre Bedinger, and also follow the show handle at CP_show. This has been another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. Follow me on Twitter as well at Cameron Parker PO, and please go feel free to read my Predominantly Orange article, which was called Denver Broncos Paxton Lynch Inching Closer to Starting. So please give that article a read. And on Tuesday, CJ Cranock will stop by again and talk about his fantasy football stardoms and sit-ems. But also, we will have Mile High Huddle insider and draft insider, actually, and draft expert Nick Kendall on, and we are going to be describing a little bit more in depth as far as this quarterback slot is concerned, and maybe give his take as far as this quarterback situation or this team in general in the current state of the Denver Broncos, according to Nick Kendall. We're going to talk to him, obviously, on Tuesday, and then come Friday, there's going to be a lot to be had, certainly. So really, there's going to be a lot to offer, certainly, with the Denver Broncos and with what could happen this Sunday, because really, at the end of the day, they aren't officially out of the playoff contention. If they can win against the Cincinatti Bengals, all is not lost. But do they decide to go to a quarterback of a first-round caliber, one that really hasn't been written off yet, but certainly doesn't look good? That is a question of, well, John Elway's potential stock potentially as a general manager. However, I think that shouldn't carry a whole lot of weight. However, John Elway invested a lot of money in Paxton Lynch at quarterback. This has been another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. Please feel free to tune in to this podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, obviously Spreaker.com, which is the host of this. And so obviously it certainly bodes well for the Cameron Parker Show when this continues to get out there. You can also listen to it on Amazon Echo. If you say, listen to the Cameron Parker Show, you will get the podcast and episodes of the Cameron Parker Show on Amazon Echo. For my producers and for everybody behind the scenes and content-wise, I want to thank everybody that's been a part of the Cameron Parker Show over the years. And so thank you guys for listening to the Cameron Parker Show. Tune in on Tuesday for more sports coverage.